My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and I raised my only son alone after his father walked out on us when he was a child. I worked as a nurse for over 3 decades, pulling double shifts, skipping meals, and putting every spare dollar into his future. I never remarried. I never took a vacation. My whole life was about giving him the best I could. So when his wedding day came, I thought my sacrifices had finally paid off. I expected respect, gratitude, maybe even pride. Instead, in front of hundreds of guests, my new daughter-in-law looked straight at me, smirked, and called me a fat pig. The laughter that followed cut deeper than any wound I've ever felt. My son stood frozen. My heart broke. But then, something none of us expected happened. Her father turned pale as a man walked into the room. A billionaire. The same man who had quietly bought out his failing company. And suddenly, everything shifted. The room that had mocked me now couldn't stop staring at me. Stay with me. Because what happened next tore the wedding apart. And I'll ask you this. If your own child allowed you to be humiliated in public, would you forgive? Or would you walk away? Subscribe for more true stories of betrayal, sacrifice, and redemption. And tell me, have you ever been judged unfairly for how you look? I've never had an easy life. Bills always seemed to pile higher than my paychecks, and there were nights when I had to choose between dinner for myself or milk for my son. I usually choose milk. That was the rhythm of my life, constant sacrifice, constant stretching of what little I had, because raising my son was the only thing that mattered. I worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood. During the day, I was an office clerk, filing papers and answering phones, never daring to take a sick day. At night, I cleaned offices and retail stores, dragging my tired body through empty hallways while my boy slept at home. I would tiptoe in, kiss his forehead, and remind myself why I kept going. School fees were the biggest struggle. I remember standing in the bursar's office, clutching my paycheck stub and begging for an extension. My son never knew how close I came to being unable to pay. He only saw the uniform waiting for him every September, pressed and clean. He only saw the lunch money tucked into his backpack. He never saw the bills I let slide, or the nights I cried behind a locked bathroom door. But I didn't want him to see. I wanted him to believe he had a mother who could handle anything. I wanted him to feel secure, even when I wasn't. There were times when relatives whispered that I spoiled him. Maybe I did. If he wanted soccer cleats, I found a way. If he dreamed of a school trip, I worked an extra shift. I wanted him to know joy, not scarcity. I wanted him to look back on his childhood and remember laughter, not hunger. I didn't buy myself new clothes for years. My shoes had holes I covered with duct tape on the inside. I skipped birthdays for myself, Christmas gifts, even basic things like a new winter coat. But I never skipped for him. His birthdays were always celebrated, even if the cake was small. At Christmas, he always had something to unwrap, even if it meant I went without heat for a month. And when he got older, when college seemed like a distant dream, I pushed harder. I took on extra shifts and begged for overtime. I borrowed when I had to, swallowing pride I didn't think I still had. Watching him walk across that graduation stage in his cap and gown, I thought all the pain had been worth it. My love for him wasn't perfect, but it was fierce. I sometimes worried that I was too soft, that I gave in too often. But he was my only child, my only family. Every sacrifice felt small compared to his smile. There were moments when I wondered if he noticed. Did he see the lines deepening on my face? Did he hear the exhaustion in my voice? Did he realize that the woman cheering in the bleachers at his soccer games had worked a double shift and hadn't eaten since morning? I never asked for thanks. I never expected a medal. All I wanted was for him to know he was loved and to grow into someone who valued that love. Looking back now, I think I believed that love would be enough, that if I gave and gave, he would always remember who stood by him when no one else did. I thought loyalty and sacrifice bound families together forever. I didn't know then how easily those ties could fray. When my son told me he was getting married, my heart almost burst. After everything, the long nights, the sacrifices, the years of watching him grow, I thought, this is it. This is the moment where all those struggles feel worth it. I imagined myself sitting proudly in the front row, tears in my eyes, watching him promise forever to the woman he loved. I imagined people looking at me and thinking, that's his mother? She raised him well. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with nervous excitement. I wanted to look my best, though deep down I dreaded shopping. My weight had crept up over the years, part stress, part exhaustion, part neglect of myself. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was being there. But when I stood in front of dressing room mirrors, the fluorescent lights made me feel twice my size. Still, I pressed on. I found a simple navy blue dress at a department store. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, just elegant enough that I wouldn't embarrass my son. I remember running my hand over the fabric, wondering if it looked too plain, but telling myself, it's not about me, it's about him. I paired it with low heels because I knew I couldn't manage stilettos, and I bought a delicate necklace with the last of my savings. I spent evenings practicing a little speech I hoped to give at the reception. Nothing long, just a few heartfelt words about how proud I was, how grateful I felt to see my son step into a new chapter. I scribbled drafts on notepads, practicing in front of the mirror, even holding back tears as I said the words aloud. In the weeks before the ceremony, I called him often, offering to help. Do you need me to run errands? Pick up decorations? Help with anything? His replies were short. No, Mum, we've got it covered. I brushed it off, assuming he was stressed. Weddings were overwhelming after all. I even asked what colour scheme the wedding party was wearing, hoping I could coordinate. He hesitated before saying, just wear something you're comfortable in, Mom. His tone was polite, but it stung. I reminded myself not to take it personally. Still, I dreamed about the day. I imagined walking into the hall, guests turning to see me, the proud mother of the groom. I imagined people congratulating me, asking about the years I'd spent raising him. For once, maybe my sacrifices wouldn't be invisible. On the morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn. I ironed my dress carefully, brushed my hair until it shone, and applied makeup slowly, something I rarely did. As I looked in the mirror, I saw the lines of age, the softness in my body, the weariness in my eyes. A part of me wondered if people would whisper about how ordinary I looked compared to the glamorous guests. But another part of me whispered back, this is your son's wedding. Your love is enough. I tucked my speech into my purse, along with tissues. I imagined crying tears of joy, not knowing the tears waiting for me would come from something else entirely. As I left the house, locking the door behind me, my chest felt light with pride. My son was getting married, and I believed, foolishly, that I was stepping into a day of honor, not humiliation. At first, I thought it was nerves. Every bride is anxious before her wedding, I told myself. Every bride wants things to be perfect. But with her, there was something more, something sharp under the sweetness, like a smile hiding a sneer. The first time I felt it was when I offered to help with the wedding invitations. I was excited, thinking I could at least fold or stamp envelopes. She smiled politely, then said, "Oh, thank you, Margaret, but the calligrapher is handling everything. These are going to some very important people. It has to look professional." The word professional stung. I knew she wasn't talking about handwriting. She was talking about me. I nodded, forcing a smile, but in my chest, I felt a pinch. I told myself not to overthink. Later, during a family dinner, she glanced at my hands as I reached for the salt. "You work hard, don't you?" she said, her voice light, but her eyes fixed on the roughness of my skin. "Your hands show it. Such character." Everyone laughed politely, but I felt the weight of it. I saw how her mother, elegant in silk, raised her glass without meeting my eyes. She dropped little comments here and there, always dressed as compliments. "You're so practical, Margaret. I love how you don't worry about fashion." Or, "I admire how down-to-earth you are. My family is a bit different." She said these things with her manicured fingers resting on crystal glasses, her bracelets glittering under the light, while I sat in my modest blouse, wishing I could shrink into the chair. One afternoon, she invited me to a boutique to look at colours for the bridesmaids. I thought maybe she wanted me involved. When I arrived, the store gleamed with gowns far beyond my budget. She held fabrics against her skin, shimmering silk and lace, then turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Have you found something to wear for the big day?" she asked. "Yes," I said proudly. "A simple navy dress. Nothing too flashy, but it feels right." Her lips curved into that polite smile again. "Oh, navy. That's safe. Don't worry, the guests won't expect you to keep up with everyone else." The words landed like a slap. She turned back to the mirror, adjusting a pearl earring, as if she hadn't said anything cruel. I stood frozen, clutching my handbag, forcing myself to breathe. That night, I lay awake, replaying her words. "The guests won't expect you to keep up." It wasn't what she said. It was what she meant. She was reminding me that I didn't belong in her world, that I was an outsider. My son's wedding was supposed to be about family, about love, about joy. Yet slowly, I felt myself being pushed to the edge, as though my presence was something to be tolerated rather than welcomed. Still, I tried. I offered to cook something for the rehearsal dinner. She shook her head. "We're hiring a caterer. The menu has to match the wine list." I asked if she wanted me to help decorate. She laughed softly. "Oh, don't worry about that. The planner is taking care of everything. Oh, it's not the kind of wedding where the family strings up balloons, you know?" Each refusal chipped away at me. I began to dread our conversations. Even when she was polite, I heard the undertone, the unspoken. "You don't fit. You're not one of us." My son seemed blind to it. When I hinted at her comments, he brushed them off. "She didn't mean it like that, Mum. You're overthinking. She's just under a lot of stress." Maybe he was right. Maybe I was overthinking, but my heart knew. The small humiliations piled up, quiet but heavy, until I carried them like stones in my chest. One evening, as I left their house after another stilted dinner, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My reflection looked tired, small, almost defeated. For a moment, I wondered if that was how she saw me. Someone ordinary, someone unworthy of pride. I straightened my shoulders, forcing myself to whisper, "I am his mother. Nothing can change that." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Because love was not the only thing being tested. Respect was, too. And I was beginning to realize I was losing that battle. The morning of the wedding arrived with sunlight spilling across my modest curtains. I woke before dawn, heart pounding in my chest. My navy dress hung neatly on the door. I had pressed it the night before, smoothing every crease until my hands ached. It wasn't designer or new, but it was mine, and it was the best I could offer. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The dress fit, though snug at the waist. My shoes were plain, but polished. I added the pearl earrings my late mother had given me. They were small, almost invisible compared to the kind of jewelry I knew I would see that day, but they carried meaning. I whispered to myself, "Hold your head high. You belong because you raised him. You belong because you love him." The venue was like something out of a magazine. As I stepped through the grand doors, I froze. Crystal chandeliers hung high above. Golden drapes shimmered in the sunlight. White roses lined the aisle, their scent thick in the air. Every chair was covered in satin, tied with silver ribbons. It was breathtaking, yet I felt my throat tighten. I had never been in a place like this before. Guests began to arrive, each one dressed as though they were walking into a royal ball. The men wore tailored suits, some with silk pocket squares. The women floated past me in gowns that sparkled with sequins, heels clicking against marble floors. Diamonds caught the light at every turn. My navy dress suddenly felt small, invisible. I smiled at people as they passed, but most only offered quick nods. Some glanced at my outfit, their eyes flickering with polite curiosity, then drifted away to join clusters of laughter and chatter. I felt the familiar prickle of being on the outside looking in. I spotted my son across the room, radiant in his tuxedo. For a moment, pride swelled so strong it chased away everything else. He looked handsome, confident, exactly as I had always dreamed he would on this day. My heart whispered, "That's my boy. No one can take that away from me." When his bride entered, the room hushed. She was stunning, her gown a cascade of lace and pearls, her veil trailing like a river of light. The guests gasped in admiration, phones lifted discreetly to capture her glow. I watched, hands clasped tightly in my lap, and forced myself to smile. Despite everything, this was her day. The ceremony began, and the officiant's voice carried through the air. I tried to focus on the vows, the solemn promises, the words about love and unity. But my mind wandered. My gaze flickered to the wealthy faces around me, their laughter during pauses, their confidence in belonging here. I wondered what they saw when they looked at me. Did they know how many hours I worked to put food on the table? Did they know how many nights I lay awake, worrying about bills, while their lives moved in silk and champagne? At one point, her mother glanced at me from the front row. Her eyes swept over me, not unkind, but distant, like I was part of the scenery, not part of the family. I dropped my gaze, cheeks burning. Still, I fought to hold my pride. I sat taller, hands folded in my lap. I reminded myself, I gave him life. I gave him everything I had. Without me, this day would not exist. When they exchanged rings, I felt tears rise unbidden. Not from sadness, not entirely, but from the weight of years rushing back, nights of sewing clothes by dim light, mornings of skipping meals so he could eat, afternoons of cheering at school plays even when I had no energy left. And now, here he was, a man, promising his life to another. My sacrifices were woven into this moment, though no one else could see it. As the officiant declared them husband and wife, applause thundered through the hall. The bride and groom kissed, radiant under the glow of chandeliers. Everyone rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. I stood too, clapping with the rest, forcing my smile wide though my chest ached. For a flicker of a moment, my son's eyes met mine. I thought I saw gratitude there, or maybe relief. But then he turned back to his bride, the crowd surrounding them, and the moment was gone. As we filed out toward the reception, I felt pride and isolation wrestle inside me. The wedding was beautiful, flawless, a display of wealth and elegance I could never match. And yet, beneath the sparkle, I felt the shadow of distance. I told myself to hold on. The day was not about me, but deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "You don't belong here, not in their eyes." I swallowed hard, straightened my back, and followed the others into the next hall, unaware of how much that whisper would soon be proven right. The reception hall sparkled even more than the ceremony had. Round tables were covered in crisp white cloth, each adorned with towering vases of roses. A string quartet played softly in the corner, while waiters weaved between guests, carrying silver trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres I couldn't even name. Laughter filled the air, bouncing off the marble walls, rich and confident. I took a seat at a table near the back. My place card had been tucked there, far from the head table where my son and his new wife sat surrounded by her family. I didn't complain. I knew my dress wasn't glamorous enough to blend in. I told myself, it doesn't matter where you sit. What matters is that you're here, watching your son begin his new life. Still, my chest tightened as I watched her parents laughing with friends at the front, their gestures wide and carefree. They looked at home in this glittering world. I felt like a visitor, an outsider who had been granted temporary entry. Dinner was served, and as I tried to cut into my portion, I heard it, the first laugh. High-pitched, sharp, and unmistakably directed my way. I looked up. At the head table, my daughter-in-law was leaning toward her friends. Her lips curled in a smirk, and then, in a voice far louder than necessary, she said, "Oh my God, look at her. She looks like a fat pig stuffed into that dress." The words hung in the air like a slap. The girls around her burst out laughing, hands covering their perfectly painted mouths. Their giggles weren't discreet. They wanted me to hear. They wanted everyone to hear. Heat surged through my face, spreading down my neck, across my chest. My fork clattered against my plate as my hands began to tremble. I sat, frozen, staring at the tablecloth, wishing I could disappear into it. Whispers rippled around me. Guests turned, glanced, then quickly looked away. Some laughed awkwardly with the bride, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But no one spoke up. No one stopped her. I forced myself to look at my son. He sat there at the head table, jaw tight, eyes flicking from his wife to me. He didn't laugh, but he didn't say anything either. He just sat there, frozen, like a statue carved out of shame and silence. I wanted him to stand. I wanted him to say, "Don't you dare speak to my mother that way." I wanted him to show the loyalty I had shown him every single day of his life. But he didn't. He lowered his eyes and let the moment pass. The bride leaned back in her chair, still grinning. "Honestly," she added for everyone to hear, "it's embarrassing. Some people don't know their place." The laughter rose again, sharper this time, like knives scraping against glass. I pressed my napkin to my lap and tried to breathe. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Every insecurity I had ever carried about my body, my clothes, my weight, it all came rushing back at once, magnified by the cruelty of her words. Fat pig. The phrase looped in my head, over and over, each time hitting harder. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the room, hide in the bathroom, and never come back. But my legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. I had spent my life working 2 jobs to raise my son, stitching his uniforms, skipping meals so he could eat, praying he would one day have more than I ever did. And this was what I got in return: mockery, laughter, and silence from the boy I had raised. Around me, I heard fragments of whispers. Did she really say that? Oh no, poor woman. Why isn't he stopping her? Their pity stung worse than the insult. I sat perfectly still, back straight, eyes fixed on my plate. Dignity was all I had left to hold on to. If I broke down, if I cried, she would win. They would all laugh louder. So I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my face into a mask of calm, though inside I was breaking apart. Minutes dragged by. The music played on. The chatter resumed, though quieter, strained. But the wound remained wide open, raw. Every laugh in the room sounded sharper now. Every glance felt like it was aimed at me. When the waiters cleared the plates, I found my hands still trembling, the forks smeared with untouched food. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. My appetite had disappeared, replaced by a hollowness I had never known before. My son finally looked at me again, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth as though to speak, then closed it, eyes darting back to his wife. She leaned against him, whispering something into his ear, smirking at me from across the hall. He said nothing. The shame sat heavy on my shoulders. My son's silence weighed even more than her words. As the toasts began, I barely heard them. My ears rang, my thoughts spinning. Laughter and applause blurred together, distant and meaningless. All I could hear was her voice calling me a fat pig, echoing inside me like a curse. For the first time that day, I wished I had not come at all. I don't remember making the decision to stand. One moment, I was sitting there with my hands shaking beneath the tablecloth, my fork untouched on the plate, my ears still burning from her words. And then, before I realized it, I was pushing back my chair. The scrape of the legs against the marble floor cut through the music like a blade. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. I rose slowly, carefully, forcing my posture tall, even though every muscle inside me wanted to collapse. My napkin slid from my lap to the floor, but I didn't stoop to pick it up. I held my chin high and pressed my trembling hands against my dress to steady them. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. The weight of 100 eyes fell on me at once. I could feel their whispers forming, their curiosity sharp and restless. Some mouths already tilted toward each other. Some guests tried to look away, but their eyes darted back, unable to resist the spectacle. From the head table, my daughter-in-law leaned back smugly, her lips curved in a victorious smile. To her, this was confirmation. She had struck her blow, and now she was watching me retreat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she dared insult the woman who had raised the man she had just married. I wanted to shout at my son, "Why are you letting this happen? Why won't you protect me?" But I didn't. I had given my whole life to raising him. I had worked until my hands cracked, skipped meals so he could eat, stayed awake through long nights so he could sleep peacefully. I had endured years of loneliness, hardship, and exhaustion so he could walk proudly into a better life. And this was how it ended, with me standing in silence, mocked and discarded. If I shouted now, I would reduce myself to her level. If I broke down, she would win. So I chose something else. Dignity. I lifted my gaze, not toward her, not even toward my son, but toward the far side of the hall, as if my eyes could find an invisible exit, a place untouched by humiliation. My throat burned, but I swallowed it down. My lips pressed together in a thin line of resolve. The whispers grew louder. Is she leaving? She looks so calm. I would have slapped her. The bride's friends giggled into their champagne flutes, whispering again. Her father shifted uncomfortably, his brows furrowed, but even he said nothing. My son sat frozen, a shadow of the boy I had raised, his silence screaming louder than any words. Every step I prepared to take felt like walking on shards of glass, but I told myself with each inhale, you are stronger than this moment. You are stronger than their cruelty. The violinists continued their song as if nothing had happened. The waiters moved with stiff politeness, eyes flicking toward me and then away. Life carried on in that gilded room, but for me, time slowed into something unbearable, each second stretching endlessly. I thought of the years leading to this day, the mornings when I walked to work in worn-out shoes so he could have new ones for school. The nights when I rubbed my aching back, whispering promises that one day he would stand tall and proud, and that it would all be worth it. And now here I was, standing tall, but alone. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. My body betrayed me with trembling hands and a pounding heart, but my face stayed calm, steady, unreadable. That was all I had left. One guest near me reached out, as if to steady me, but I gently shook my head. I didn't want pity. I didn't want saving. I wanted only to walk out of that room with what little dignity remained. For a brief second, I caught my son's eyes. He looked torn, ashamed, angry, conflicted, but not enough to move. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. He didn't even stand. His silence cut deeper than her insult. I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill me, forcing myself to draw strength from the simple act of breathing. My voice was gone, but my silence was louder than anything I could have said. If they expected me to cause a scene, they would be disappointed. If they thought they had broken me, they would see otherwise. I straightened my shoulders and took one step toward the aisle. The marble floor echoed faintly under my heels. The whispers spread again, rippling outward like waves across the sea of guests. Some turned their heads away in shame, others leaned in to gossip. But I walked slowly, deliberately, like a soldier on a final march. Every step was agony, but every step was strength. At that moment, I understood something I had never realized before. Silence can be more powerful than shouting. Dignity can cut deeper than retaliation. I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away with my pride intact, and that was something no insult could strip from me. The bride smirked again, but there was a flicker in her eyes, just for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty. Perhaps she had expected me to cry, to crumble, to lash out in anger and humiliate myself further. My calmness unsettled her. I kept moving, step by step, toward the exit, refusing to look back. The music swelled, laughter resumed in pockets, but all I heard was the steady beat of my heart, carrying me forward. I held myself upright, as if my dignity were a cloak wrapped tight around me, shielding me from their cruelty. And though my heart was breaking, I promised myself one thing. I would not let her see me fall was 3 steps from the door when the atmosphere in the hall shifted. The whispers that had followed me trailed off into silence. The violinists faltered, their bowstrings trembling mid-note. A ripple passed through the guests, one head turning, then another, until the entire room was staring in the same direction. The doors behind me opened. I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because the stillness that swept over the room forced me to pause. The air thickened, as if the chandeliers above had dropped their weight onto our shoulders. A man stepped inside, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He carried no entourage, no fanfare, yet his presence commanded more authority than the entire wedding combined. His stride was calm but purposeful, the kind of walk that belonged to someone used to owning the ground beneath his feet. I didn't recognize him at first, but I didn't need to. The reaction around me said it all. The father of the bride, ruddy-faced and boastful only moments ago, turned pale. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the floor. The bride's friends gasped. Even the groom stiffened in his seat. The man who had humiliated me sat frozen, his mouth slightly open, his face drained of all its smug colour. I turned my head just enough to glance at the commotion, and that's when I realised. It was him, the billionaire, the man whose name had whispered through the business pages for months. Rumours said he had quietly acquired failing companies, restructuring them behind the scenes. Powerful, elusive, rarely seen in public gatherings like this one. And now, here he was, walking into my humiliation as if destiny had opened the door for him. The irony struck me before it struck anyone else. The father of the bride, the man whose family had mocked me, whose daughter had called me a fat pig, was staring into the eyes of the man who now owned the company he had once bragged about. His empire was no longer his. His arrogance stood on borrowed ground. The billionaire's gaze swept the room like a blade, cutting through the silence. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, didn't explain himself. He didn't have to. His mere presence was enough to strip every ounce of false pride from the bride's family. I saw the bride's smirk falter. Her hand, which had rested smugly on her wineglass minutes earlier, tightened until her knuckles whitened. She leaned toward her father in panic. He avoided her eyes, sweat beading on his temple. The billionaire walked past me without pause, his cologne sharp and clean, his shoes clicking against the marble like a gavel striking judgment. But for a brief moment, his eyes met mine. Not with mockery, not with pity, but with recognition. It was as if he had seen everything that had just unfolded. My silent stand, my quiet dignity, the humiliation I had endured. And though he said nothing, that single look felt like acknowledgement, a validation stronger than applause. I lifted my chin a fraction higher. The bride's father attempted to compose himself. He straightened his jacket, forcing a smile so wide it looked painful. Mr. Stanton," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of the room's silence. What an honor to see you here." Gasps followed. Stanton. The name rippled across the guests like a storm. Even I knew it, the billionaire who had risen from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful men in the country. Mr. Stanton didn't answer immediately. He paused at the center of the room, letting the tension coil tighter. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but cutting. "I wasn't planning to attend," he said, "but when I heard there was a celebration here, I thought it appropriate to see how gratitude is expressed in this family." The words struck like a whip. I wasn't sure if they were meant for me, or for all of us, but I felt them sink deep. The bride's father chuckled nervously, dabbing at his forehead with a napkin. Of course. Gratitude is, well, gratitude is everything. Isn't it, Margaret? My name on his lips felt strange. A man who had ignored me all evening now turned to use me as his shield. The guests followed his gaze, their eyes burning into me once again. But this time, it wasn't mockery I saw in their stares. It was curiosity, respect, even guilt. Mr. Stanton turned his head toward me briefly. He said nothing, but the silence he allowed to settle around my presence spoke louder than any speech. The bride shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her earlier insult now hung heavy in the air, no longer a joke, but a stain exposed under the harshest light. I remained still, my hands clasped in front of me, my composure unbroken. For the first time that evening, I felt the power shift, not because I had raised my voice, but because the truth had walked through the door in the shape of a man who owed them nothing and owned everything they had. The father of the bride cleared his throat again. "Please, Mr. Stanton, let's enjoy the evening. No need for formality here. We are all family now." The word family landed bitter on my tongue, a word that had been used to exclude me, to humiliate me, now tossed desperately like a lifeline by a man drowning in fear of losing his reputation. Mr. Stanton didn't respond right away. He let the silence punish the room, his eyes fixed coldly on the trembling father. And I thought to myself, fate has a strange way of settling scores. The same people who called me less than, who thought wealth and appearances made them untouchable, now stood exposed. Their empire, their pride, their very sense of superiority rested in the hands of the man before them. And he had chosen this moment, my moment of humiliation, to appear. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But deep inside, I felt something shift. For the first time that day, it wasn't me standing small under their judgment. It was them, shrinking under the weight of a truth they could no longer hide. And all I had done was stand in silence. The moment William Harrington stepped into the hall, the atmosphere shifted. His presence was like a ripple across still water. Every head turned, every whisper hushed. I had seen him only once before, in a newspaper photo that celebrated another acquisition of his empire. But seeing him in person was different. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who never had to prove anything to anyone. All eyes went to the father of the bride. His face drained of color, as if someone had pulled the blood right out of his veins. I noticed his hands tremble slightly as he fumbled with his napkin. My heart beat faster, not because I expected anything, but because I knew this man's arrival meant something big. The bride tried to cover her shock with a smile. She whispered something to her friends, forcing a laugh, but I saw the stiffness in her jaw. She had no idea what was coming. Then Harrington's eyes swept across the room. For a moment, it felt like he was looking for someone. My stomach sank. Surely he wouldn't be here for me. I was no one important, at least. That's what my daughter-in-law had made me feel like. But then, he started walking. Not toward the father of the bride, who now looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Not toward the bride herself, who straightened in her chair, expecting acknowledgement. No, his path was aimed directly at me. I froze, unsure of how to react. My mind scrambled. Why me? Why would a man like William Harrington bother with someone like me? When he reached my table, he smiled warmly and extended his hand. "Margaret," he said, his voice calm and steady, "it's good to see you again." The room gasped. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me. My hand trembled as I placed it in his. "Mr. Harrington," I whispered, barely able to speak. He leaned closer so only I could hear. "Don't let anyone here make you feel small. You've earned more respect than most of them combined." Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I nodded instead, my throat too tight for words. From the corner of my eye, I saw the father of the bride shift uncomfortably in his chair. His face was red now, his embarrassment written in every wrinkle of his expression. He had mocked me earlier, laughed with his daughter when she called me a fat pig. But now he looked like the floor might swallow him whole. Guests began whispering again, But this time, their tone had changed. "Did you see that? He knows Margaret? He went straight to her. Why is he ignoring the bride's family?" I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, but inside me, something shifted. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt seen. Harrington turned to the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the room. "I didn't come tonight for business," he said. "I came because Margaret is someone I respect deeply. A woman of strength, of character, of quiet dignity. She deserves better than what she has been given here tonight." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't expected him to say anything, let alone something so direct, so piercing. The bride's face twisted in shock. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound fell flat, hollow, awkward. Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, no longer smiling. Her father opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. His lips moved, his face strained, but nothing. He sat back down heavily, defeated. And me. I sat in stunned silence, every muscle in my body tense. I didn't know where to look. Part of me wanted to shrink away, to hide from the attention. But another part of me, a part that had been buried for too long under years of sacrifice and quiet endurance, lifted its head and stood tall inside me. The whispers grew louder now. She's the one he respects. All this time they mocked her. Maybe we misjudged. I looked across the hall at my son. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. My heart ached, because this moment, this acknowledgement, was what I had always wished for from him. Not from a billionaire, not from strangers, but from my own child. Yet here I was, recognized by someone powerful, while my son sat frozen, torn between his wife and his mother. I straightened in my seat. I would not let the pain show. If this night had taught me anything, it was that dignity could be my armor. Harrington gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before sitting down beside me. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. He chose to sit with me, not at the head table, not with the powerful in-laws, but with the woman who had been humiliated. The bride's smile had completely vanished now. She whispered harshly to her father, her hands gesturing wildly, but he refused to look at her. His shame had swallowed him whole. I glanced around the hall. People who had once looked at me with pity or disdain were now offering me nods, soft smiles, even respect. For so long, I had been made to feel small, but tonight, something had changed. I realized it wasn't about power, or money, or appearances. It was about truth, and truth has a way of shining through, no matter how others try to bury it. As I sat there, surrounded by whispers and stares, I finally understood something. I didn't need the bride's approval. I didn't need her father's acknowledgement. And as painful as it was, I didn't even need my son's silence-breaking apology to validate me. My worth wasn't theirs to give or to take away. For the first time that night, I exhaled without shaking. The tables had turned, and while I still carried the sting of cruel words, I also carried something stronger, dignity that no insult could destroy. The moment William Harrington sat beside me, the atmosphere in the hall shifted completely. What had been whispers of judgment turned into murmurs of shock, gossip flowing like wildfire. I could almost hear the clinking of champagne glasses falter as people leaned into one another, eager to share their version of the story. Everywhere I looked, eyes darted toward me, then back to the bride, then again to her father, as though trying to piece together the strange puzzle unfolding before them. Just moments earlier, I had been the object of ridicule, labelled a fat pig by the woman who now wore the crown of humiliation. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I had won anything. Instead, I sat still, breathing carefully, my hands clasped together in my lap, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions. Embarrassment still clung to me, but now it mingled with an unexpected wave of dignity. Across the hall, I caught my son's eyes. For a fleeting second, his gaze softened. I saw something there. Confusion, shame, maybe even guilt. But just as quickly he looked away, torn between his new wife and his mother. That hurt more than anything else. The bride sat rigid in her chair, her hands gripping the stem of her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might snap. Her smile was gone, replaced by a strained expression she couldn't mask. Every attempt she made to regain control of the room, forced laughter, whispered comments to her friends, only made her look smaller against the weight of her own cruelty. Guests began to drift in small clusters, murmuring as they glanced toward me. I heard fragments. "Did you hear what she called her? And in front of everyone? Disgraceful." It struck me how quickly people's loyalties shifted. Moments ago, no one had stepped in to defend me. They had watched in silence, too polite or too cowardly, to challenge the bride's insult. But now that Harrington had publicly shown respect for me, they scrambled to adjust their opinions, eager not to be on the wrong side of the story. The irony wasn't lost on me. Respect given out of fear or convenience is no respect at all. Still, it felt strange to watch the bride shrink under the same collective judgment she had weaponized against me. Her father sat beside her, face pale, eyes fixed firmly on his plate. He avoided the stares, avoided the whispers, avoided everything. A man who had laughed moments earlier was now broken by shame, powerless under the weight of truth. My son shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. I could see the conflict warring inside him. He had heard his wife mock me, seen her laugh with her friends, yet he had done nothing. And now, watching the tide turn, he couldn't hide from the reality that his silence had made him complicit. Part of me longed for him to stand up, to say something, anything, that would mend the crack in my heart. But he didn't. He remained still, his lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes darting between his bride and me. The reception continued, but the joy had gone out of the room. The music played, but no one danced. Laughter rang out, but it was brittle, forced. The weight of what had happened lingered like smoke after a fire, impossible to ignore. I excused myself quietly from the table, needing air. Harrington gave me a reassuring nod, but he didn't stop me. I think he understood that I needed a moment alone. As I stepped into the garden outside, the cool night air wrapped around me like a balm. For the first time since the insult, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. I replayed the bride's words in my mind, sharp, cutting, designed to humiliate. They still stung, but less so now. Because for all her cruelty, I hadn't crumbled. I had stood, I had endured, and somehow, without meaning to, I had shown everyone the strength that she lacked. I leaned against the stone railing, gazing at the twinkling lights strung across the courtyard. Somewhere inside, the reception limped on, the memory of the insult refusing to fade. I wondered if my son would come to me. I wondered if he would apologize, or if he would stay bound to the woman he had chosen, too afraid to admit her faults. A few guests passed me on their way out. To my surprise, some stopped to offer soft words. "You held yourself with such grace tonight." "I'm sorry for what she said. You didn't deserve that." One woman even squeezed my hand and whispered, You're the kind of mother anyone would be lucky to have. Their words didn't erase the pain, but they soothed it. For so long I had been invisible, dismissed, underestimated. Tonight, my dignity had spoken louder than my tears ever could. When I returned to the hall, I noticed my son standing off to the side, away from his bride. His shoulders were slumped, his face heavy. He glanced at me again, and this time he didn't look away. Our eyes locked, and I saw the weight of realization in him. But he didn't come forward. He didn't speak. Perhaps he didn't know how. Perhaps he was still too afraid. I walked past him with my head high, giving him the chance, but he stayed rooted in place. My heart broke all over again, but this time there was no collapse inside me. Instead, I felt a strange calm. I had learned something tonight. Respect cannot be forced, and silence speaks as loudly as words. As the night wore on, the bride grew more frantic. She tried to joke, tried to laugh, but no one responded the way she wanted. People smiled politely, but then turned away, leaving her isolated at her own wedding. The cruelty she had shown me had stained her, and no amount of charm could wash it off. By the time I finally left, slipping into the quiet night, I knew the wedding would be remembered, but not for its beauty, not for its joy. It would be remembered for the moment dignity silenced cruelty, for the moment a bride revealed her true colours, and for the silence of a son who failed to defend his mother. As I walked to my car, I pressed my hands against the steering wheel and let the tears fall at last. They weren't only tears of pain, they were tears of release. Because for the first time, I truly understood that my worth didn't depend on my son, his bride, or anyone else in that hall. My worth was mine, and no insult could take it away. And maybe, just maybe, my son had finally seen that too. When I finally returned home after the wedding, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room. The air was heavy, and for the first time all day, I allowed my tears to flow freely. The humiliation still echoed in my chest, the laughter, the stares, the silence of my own son. I had carried that pain like a stone in my heart throughout the night. But then I remembered the moment everything changed, the billionaire's arrival, the way he greeted me, not them, the whispers that swept through the hall, the look on the bride's father's face as his arrogance crumbled, and most of all, the sudden respect that returned to me, not because of wealth, but because I had chosen silence instead of rage. I realized then that the world judges too quickly. People look at your body, your clothes, your class, and they assume your worth. They don't see the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the love that has no price tag. They only see what they want to mock. But dignity, real dignity, cannot be taken away. I asked myself a question that still lingers in my soul. If the world mocked you for your flaws, would you crumble and break? Or would you stand tall, holding on until truth revealed your worth? I chose to stand. That day, my silence was not weakness, it was strength. Strength that forced everyone to see me differently when the truth unfolded. And the moral became clear to me. Respect matters more than money or appearances. People may call you names, dismiss you, or erase your sacrifices. But the measure of your worth is not in their words. It is in how you carry yourself when the spotlight turns cruel. To anyone listening to my story, never forget who you are. Never let insults define you. And never believe that your sacrifices were wasted, even if those closest to you refuse to acknowledge them. Because family is not only about blood or status, it is about love, loyalty, and respect. Without those, the word family is empty. So I leave you with this question. If your own child or in-law rejected you in public, would you forgive or would you walk away? Subscribe for more true stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and redemption. And share below, have you ever been judged unfairly for how you look?